Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala sayyidina Rasulillahi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Allahumma ya munawwir ya fattah, nawwir qulubana bidun ma'rifatik, وافتح لنا أبواب حكمتك وانشر علينا خزائن رحمتك إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وإخلاصا وصدقا في الدين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وصلى اللهم وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We left off in this text of Sidi Abdul Wahid ibn Ashir rahimahullah ta'ala, going through some of the preliminary components of fiqh in the school of Imam Malik, or what is also known as the school of Ahl al-Madinah. And we had reached the section on Tayammum. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَنَفَعْنَا بِعُلُومِهِ فِي الدَّارَيْنِ آمين. فصل لخوف ضر أو عدم ماء عوض من الطهارة التيمم وصل فرضا واحدا وإن تصل جنازة وسنة به تحل وجاز للنفل ابتداء ويستبيح الفرض للجمعة حاضر صحيح. So he says, for fear of harm or lack of water, substitute wudu with earth ablution or tayammum. So tayammum, linguistically, tayammum refers to al-qasd. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تَيَمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثِ. Like, don't intend, right, to do foul acts or foul things. From a shara'i perspective, the technical understanding of tayammum is a ritual dirt ablution or earth ablution that removes hadath temporarily. So the state of minor ritual impurity or major ritual impurity. Okay, so whether you are in hadath al-asghar or akbar, you can use tayammum to remove you from that state, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly gives us this instruction in the Quran, where He says, فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا. When you don't find water, then make tayammum. And one of the things that the scholars say is that this is actually one of the gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The message that had come down prior to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it included prayer and all of these types of things, but it did not include tayammum as being a means by which one can ritually purify themselves. So as some of them said, for example, that if there was a time where they weren't able to find water to make ritual ablution with, then they would have to wait until they found water and then make up the prayers that they missed as a result of which. So alhamdulillah. So in this section, typically, you would look at a number of different components around the concept of tayammum. And in this, Ibn Ashir looks at 6. So he's going to look at when is tayammum an option for us to actually use or utilize. What can one do with their tayammum? What can one make tayammum with? What are the obligatory and the sunnah and the recommended acts of tayammum? And then the duration or the time that's typically associated with one's tayammum, which is also part of the obligatory matters that he extends on. And then the last thing is what either nullifies a tayammum or what circumstances would make one repeat the prayer. So he says, firstly, when is it an option? Ibn Ashir says it can be done out of fear of harm or lack of water. And these are the two major reasons for tayammum. So fear of harm can be delineated basically into 3 things. The first one is using water would make one sick. So it's cold outside, we live in Chicago or something like that, and we're outside, and we have to make wudu for Fajr prayer. This actually happens a lot, and this happened to me, for example, different places, particularly overseas, where you know that it's freezing outside, you're outside, and if you make wudu, more than likely you're going to get sick. So at that point then tayammum is acceptable. The second reason could be that one is already sick and they know that making wudu would make them more sick. And then the third reason is that they're already sick, and by making wudu, there is a high chance that they would be prolonging the recovery time that they would need to get better. So these are the three reasons basically that are given. They also include in this skin issues. So if a person has a certain type of skin issue, then tayammum also becomes permissible. The other type of harm, it would come about from one actually trying to get the water itself. So the books of fiqh, they discuss different types of harm that are in one's way to getting the water. So for example, there are a pack of wolves, for instance, outside, and you have to go outside, like you're in a cabin or something like that. You have to go outside to actually get the water. Or you're camping and there's a bear outside, and there's that's where the water is. At that point, obviously, khalas, you can make tayammum. Majid, you have a question?
Yes. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Alaykum salam.
So, what's the definition of lack of water? Like, I think it would depend on the context. Let's say you're hiking in a dry area.
Yeah.
You have a little water there you have for drinking. When do you determine, okay, is this enough for me to do? Well,
Yeah. So that's forthcoming. It's coming up right now.
oh, okay.
Yeah, inshallah. Good question though. So he says some type of danger, okay, based on whether there's an animal outside or you're in a dangerous geographical region, wells, for example, that are not accessible, okay, and you know that in order to actually get the water, you would put yourself in danger, or just undue hardship, okay, like having to hike up a mountain that you're not prepared to actually climb in order to get to the water. So again, in that case, you can make use of tayammum. And then lastly, looking at the concept of lack of water, which is what Majid brought us to, lack of water would include, one, literally there's no water to be found. So there's just no water around you whatsoever. Two, the only water available is, say, drinking water, and you need it for that reason. So you're not going to go into the water that you have because it's for drinking purposes. Or the water is for cooking or some need. Like you have an animal, for example, who needs it, or there's a need for it that cannot be used for wudu, right? They also include, by the way, locations where it is certain that there is no water. And he's going to go into more details forthcoming as well. So then he talks about what a person can do with tayammum. And he says, only perform one obligatory prayer with it, which means it's only valid for one prayer. So if you're going to pray two obligatory prayers, like say for instance you're traveling and you're combining the prayers, and you can only make tayammum for some reason, then you would have to make two separate tayammum. You'd have to make tayammum for the first obligatory prayer, and then afterwards make another tayammum for the other obligatory prayer. And then he says, but it's permissible to follow it up with a sunnah prayer or a funeral prayer afterwards. So the ancillary prayers that are ascribed to the obligatory prayers, once you've prayed, okay, like the sunan, those you can pray with the same tayammum that you've made for the obligatory prayer. Or if there's a funeral prayer that happens, like typically, especially if you're in certain areas of the world where there's always usually funeral prayers that happen in conjunction with a obligatory prayer, so that's allowed. And he also mentions just that it happens immediately after you make the tayammum. So you make the tayammum and then you immediately go into the obligatory prayer, and then from there immediately go into the sunan or the funeral prayer. And then he gets a little technical. So, firstly, it's important to note that Malikis delineate different types of circumstances or people into three categories. You have what's known as a healthy resident, hadir sahih, and then you have a sick resident, al-Murid, and then you have al-Musafir, which is the traveler. So with each of these, there are going to be different considerations that we have to keep in mind. So here he also says it's permissible to do a tayammum for a nafila, but that is only if you are a sick person or a traveler. In other words, you can make a tayammum just to pray a nafila prayer, just to pray a sunnah, like a recommended prayer. But that is something that is open for a sick person and a traveler. And mind you, if they prayed the sunnah before, they would have to make a separate tayammum then for the fard afterwards, if they were going to pray a fard afterwards. Because the exception that was made on account of sunan prayers that happen after the obligatory prayer. But if a healthy resident who has to make tayammum, then it should only be done for the obligatory prayers. So a healthy resident should be making tayammum only for obligatory prayers. And should the healthy resident fall into the circumstance where that happens to them, where they need to make tayammum during Friday, before the Jum'ah prayer, then they no longer should attend the Jum'ah prayer. They don't need to pray the Jum'ah prayer. They should just pray the Dhuhr prayer. The likely reason that the ulama mentioned that this is the ruling is because one of the conditions for a Jum'ah is that the town, the city in which the Jum'ah is taking place must be self-sufficient. In other words, they're not having water on that particular day would be seen as removing a condition in which made them a town to begin with. So you can't establish a town that doesn't have the necessary and vital resources that are needed to sustain its residents, and obviously water is one of them.
Could you repeat the part about the Jummah? Is that for the traveler or is that for the healthy resident?
Well, so the traveler doesn't, they're not obligated to go to Jummah to begin with. But for the healthy resident, if the healthy resident of the town for some reason had to make tayammum, then they no longer are, you no longer are obligated to pray the Jum'ah prayer, you just pray the Dhuhr prayer.
So that would mean there's really no water in the city for in that area or even in the masjid. It would be a pretty extreme circumstance, I assume.
Correct, yeah. Yeah. So the point is, the sick person or the traveler, if they make tayammum, they can either pray the fard prayer and then add after it either a sunnah prayer or a janazah prayer. And if they made tayammum to pray a sunnah prayer, they have to make another tayammum before praying the fard prayer. And the healthy resident is the same, except that he cannot make tayammum simply to pray a sunnah prayer and only a fard. So they can only make tayammum to pray a fard prayer and then follow it up with a sunnah prayer or a janazah prayer. And then additionally, this point, a healthy resident cannot make tayammum for Jum'ah. So he would make tayammum if he had to, and then just pray Dhuhr prayer, and the obligation of Jum'ah is no longer upon him or her. Any questions about that?
So a traveler could do the tayammum to pray a sunnah, and then do another tayammum to pray the obligatory, whereas a healthy resident or sick resident couldn't do that. They'd have to only make the tayammum for obligatory.
Exactly.
And then they could pray sunnahs afterwards, but they couldn't have had the intention to make tayammum for a sunnah.
For a sunnah.
Strictly. It has to be obligatory, then attached.
Good.
Afterwards.
Yes, yes. So then he gets into the obligations of tayammum. So فروضه مسحك وجها واليدين للكوع والنية أولي الضربتين ثم الموالاة سعيد طهرا ووصلها به ووقت حضرا آخره للراجي آيس فقط أوله والمتردد الوسط. So the obligations of tayammum are to wipe your face and both hands up to and including the wrists, and to set your intention with the first patting of the earth. So the niyyah alongside the first patting of the earth happens. Okay. Also included is continuity of action. So muwala, this has to happen one after the other. You can't take a break and then come back and finish. Earth that is pure. So this is anything naturally occurring on the face of the earth. So you can do it with soil, you can do it with dirt, you can do it with sand, rocks can be used, adobe, but not adobe that has been glossed, right, or like fired, like on a house or something like that. That wouldn't work. And then he says, follow the prayer immediately. By the way, this is actually why many North African houses have rocks in their home. And sometimes you even see it like in the sort of western North African region, like Tunis and Algeria, Morocco especially. A lot of the masajid, the older masajid, they have rocks, big stones in the masjid itself. And the reason for that is because people that are coming in typically late and are going to miss the jama'ah prayer, the congregational prayer, you're allowed in the Mālikī madhhab to make tayammum if you're going to miss the prayer by going and making wudu beforehand. So they facilitate for tayammum to be made. And that's actually one of the things about people that practice tayammum. They're really a people who know their religion properly. It's funny, you find nowadays that not a lot of people do this anymore. They always assume that there's some way out of it, or they just don't know, and it actually makes things a lot more difficult on them, where tayammum is a part of the religion. So
Sheikh, would catching the prayer just be getting to at least one single rak'ah with the imam in this particular case, where you would feel like, I'm not going to get one rak'ah? Like if you walk in, the prayer just started, I'm like, okay, I can pull a wudu off. And then I'm sure I'm going to get one rak'ah. And then the other question would be the size. Is there a size for the rock?
There isn't a size for the rock. I mean, you should try to find something that you can put your hand over. I'll go over what it looks like, but there's no size. You can use any rock. And there's the first question that you asked again was.
It was in order to. Do I have to feel like I'm not going to catch at least one rak'ah with
Yes.
the imam?
Yes. Yeah. So it would be that you have a strong probability that if you were to go make wudu, you would miss the jama'ah, meaning that you would not be able to catch at least one rak'ah of the prayer. And to catch the rak'ah, as we're going to look at when we get to the section on prayer, is you enter into the prayer before the imam says Sami Allahu liman hamida. If you enter into the prayer before he says Sami Allahu liman hamida, i.e. where he's rising from the bowing position, you've made that rak'ah. Alright? We'll go over it again, but that's what he means by one rak'ah. So then as he says, following the prayer immediately has to be done, and it has to be performed in the prayer time, in the actual time of the prayer itself that you're praying. And then Khalil also adds that you should remove any barriers from the skin. So like if you have a watch on, if you have a ring, you should remove the ring for tayammum. Okay, so then he says, well, how does one know? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it done? Oh, it's wait. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
If a female is like covered and she wants to make tayammum, she's rushing at the mosque doesn't have a door over it, she's going to miss a prayer. Does she do it over her scarf for like the hair part? How would it work for a female?
Yeah, well, there's no hair part in tayammum, so you don't have to take off your hijab.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So then the question that he also tries to deal with is, how does one actually know when to perform the tayammum when there is an absence of water? And so he says there are three different states that one can be in. So this gets at the question that you asked, Majid. The first state is the raji. So this is the person who thinks they will be able to get water. Okay, so we're out camping at Joshua Tree or something like that, and we're like, hey, where'd the water go? Oh, we don't know. And dhuhr comes in. Now we're pretty certain that we can find water at this point. Dhuhr just came in. We know that we had some water. We just don't know where it is. So at this point, we're in the state of what would be called dhann. In other words, we assume that we're going to be able to get water. And so that person should wait till the end of the prayer time before they pray it, in order that they have exhausted, right, all of the necessary components, one can say, in trying to actually find water. Then he says the other one is the individual who does not expect to find water. So that person should pray the prayer at the beginning of the prayer time. You don't expect to find water. You know that there was no water here. You didn't have any water. We're in the middle of a desert. It doesn't add up that we're going to find water. That person should pray the prayer right away. And one is not really expected to do more than travel like a mile or something to actually procure any of this. So, anything beyond that would be seen as undue hardship, and you can resort to making tayammum. And then lastly, he says, al-mutaraddid al-wasat. The mutaraddid is the person who he doesn't think, or she doesn't think, that they're going to find water. Right? So it's shak. Kind of a 50-50 play here. We may, I don't think we're going to, though, to be honest. That person should wait till the middle of the prayer time before they pray the prayer. Does that make sense? All right.
Not to confuse things, but just really quick, would that be ikhtiyari? Would that be the ikhtiyari, or is that...
Yeah, so it'll still be an ikhtiyari time. Yeah. Okay. All of them are basically going to tell you to do it at ikhtiyari time. The one that's going to come to the cusp of daruri would be the individual he thinks that he'll find water.
But still within the ikhtiyari.
Yeah, but it'll still be within the ikhtiyari time, correct. If one can't find anything to make tayammum at all, like there's no dirt, there's no soil, there's no nothing, like they talk about like you're in a cell or something like that, then the Malikis have two opinions, basically. The first opinion is that you're no longer responsible to pray that prayer. And some of the Malikis said, well, this could extend and then that person's just not going to pray at all. And so they said, you can just pray without tahara at that point.
Can you make the intention to combine the prayer instead, in case you can make it during Asr prayer? Not shorten, just akhir.
Can you combine the prayer?
No, like for example, I'm hiking and or I'm in an area, there's no rocks, there's no water, there's nothing there. But maybe in Asr time, I'll find something, and it's dhuhr right now, and I still haven't found anything. Could I make the intention to bring my dhuhr to Asr, but not shortening, because shortening is just for a
Yeah, so yes, you could. And and we'll get to this when we get to the section on prayer. Imam Malik is the most lenient when it comes to prayer. So even when Asr comes in, for Imam Malik, you still haven't necessarily gotten to the daruri time for dhuhr. So you're still in ikhtiyari time. And we'll get to all of that. But so yes, that inclination that you have, Nasreen, would be fine. So the sunan, he says, سننه مسحهما للمرفق وضربة اليدين ترتيب بقي. The sunan are wiping to and including the elbows, and then patting the earth a second time for both hands and following the sequential order. مندوبه تسمية وصف حميد ناقضه مثل الوضوء ويزيد وجود ماء قبل أن صلى وإن بعد يجد يعد بوقت إن يكن. The availability of purifying water before one prays. So he says its recommended acts are saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and a meritorious quality, and it's nullified by that which nullifies wudu, but add to them the availability of purifying water before one prays. If, however, he finds water after praying and it was still within the prayer time, then even though he's not obliged, he should repeat that prayer. So let me go back here really quickly. مندوبه تسمية وصف حميد. So the recommended acts are saying Bismillah at the outset, and it's nullified, so that which nullifies a tayammum is that which nullifies a wudu, and he adds the availability of purifying water before one prays and enough time to perform the wudu or catch the prayer on time. Or if water is found after performing the prayer itself, but before the prayer time elapses, it's then recommended for one to repeat the prayer with wudu in the time when one did tayammum, on account of a few examples. And he says, كَخَائِفِ اللِّصِّ وَرَاجٍ قَدَّمَ وَزَمَنٍ مُنَاوِلًا قَدْ عَدِمَ. For example, someone who was fearful of a bandit or hopeful of finding water, who nevertheless proceeds to pray during the first time even though he expected to wait until the last time, or someone who's chronically ill when he has no help, no assistant to get water for him. So those are the different ways in which your tayammum is either nullified, or circumstances in where you're going to perhaps re-pray the prayer again. On an airplane, yeah, that's a good, very practical question. So this could fall into, a circumstance of undue hardship, depending on the person. I personally go into that very small room and try to make this happen, but I also know that I have to play gymnastics in the room in order to actually do it, and that may not be doable for everyone. So if you can make wudu, you're able to do it in that room, then okay. If not, then there's you're really going to be in a type of hardship to try to make that happen, then it's permissible for you to make tayammum. Now the problem is there's nothing on the plane to make tayammum with. I've seen this move by a lot of people where they just they touch the back of the seat and they use that for tayammum, right? That's not going to work. Because it has to be earth. It has to be something that's natural to the earth. So if you have a rock, for example, that you can bring on the plane with you, then that would be probably the best way to go. Something small.
I think
Yeah?
maybe some people view it on objects, maybe they count dust as an earthly thing. From
yeah, just
airplane or a pillow.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't be sufficient for tayammum.
Okay.
Because the object itself is what you're using, and the object itself is typically plastic. Yeah, and plastic is not.
For example, like a pillow.
Yeah, so even that wouldn't work. We're trying to say, well, maybe there's dust in the pillow, and then that dust is what I'm making tayammum on, but it's not actual dust. It's a pillow, so it wouldn't be sufficient. I mean, I get it. It's really difficult to try and, especially when you're taking really long trips, going overseas. You're on the plane for a very long time. There's a lot of prayers that actually go by quickly, particularly from us traveling from the west to the east. So it's hard, but there are ways to facilitate it. The best way is to try and have a rock with you. I know a lot of people that travel with that, so just something small.
It's better than having, it just is sometimes if it's busy, people you want them to get up, sleeping. So the rock better than the water and taking that and make those people.
Well, yeah, making wudu like at your seat or something like that would also be somewhat problematic.
Can you make wudu? Can you do tayammum using the miswak, like the branch of the miswak?
Like the branch from a tree.
Yeah. So let's say if you have that on the plane with you.
Yeah.
Would that be permissible? Because it's technically.
No, it wouldn't be. So like wood and these kinds of things are not.
Oh, wood is not.
Yeah, wood would not be something that you can use. You can't use grass to make tayammum.
You can't use grass?
No, you can't use grass.
Oh, really?
No.
What about the dust that's under the grass when you? Well, actually, maybe you can't.
Well, if it's soil, yes, you can use soil. That's permissible, but.
But if there's a patch of grass, you have to find soil.
Soil, yeah, soil.
You can't, even if it's mixed. It has to be. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Interesting. I did have a question now.
Sure.
For the amount of, let's say you have some water for you to drink, say half a liter, and when do you determine, okay, is this enough water for me to make wudu and still have some for my drink? Or when do you make the decision?
You can make the decision in whatever way is right for you. In other words, yeah, you don't have to. It's not like particular measurements that have to be followed in that case. If there's water that you're going to need for drinking water, and it really can't be used for anything other than that, then that's sufficient for you then to say, I can make tayammum. So a lot of this is just using your best judgment, really. I mean, you're the person here who has to make these calls. If you know that you're in a circumstance where, yeah, it was for drinking water, but you have so much and there's literally no reason for you to even, doubt that you're going to have any need for, the amount of water that you need to make wudu, then that's fine. But the point is that if it's for drinking water and you know that it's for drinking water and it really was somewhat necessary for you to only have it as drinking water, then that's sufficient.
Sheikh, would you be able to demonstrate both the minimum? Because when it says the first, the intention,
yeah,
the first of two strikes, both the minimum for it to be obligatory and then the ideal.
Yeah. So let me. I'll go through the entirety of it really quickly. Just let me finish out this section on the sunan. So if a significant time elapses after one does tayammum with no devotional act done afterwards, it requires some sort of ritual purification having been performed. So a significant amount of time is the length of time it takes for the limbs of wudu to dry in normal conditions, they say. Also, if one makes tayammum out of forgetfulness, in other words, they forgot that they had water, okay? So say, for example, you make tayammum and then you begin your prayer and then you remember, oh yeah, wait a minute, I do have water. Then it's obligatory for that person to make up that prayer. All right? So unlike the one who had already prayed the prayer and found water afterwards, it's only recommended for that person to re-pray the prayer. They don't have to necessarily, okay, but they can. Whereas this is different, and the ulama basically say it's different because they didn't make a reasonable enough effort to look for water. So, they forgot that they did have water, they forgot that there was water, that they actually come into water at some level. So they're required then to break the prayer, make wudu, and restart. Okay? Now, the actual tayammum itself would look somewhat like this, okay? So you have one pat, okay, that's the obligatory. And then you do the face. So you go from the hairline, take off the glasses. Also, I wouldn't have this ring on, okay? From the hairline, doing the entirety of the face, and then down to the chin. Okay? And then from there, you simply just do the right hand and the left hand and then the thumbs. That's it. That's the obligatory. Okay? That's what the minimum that needs to be done. Right? Now the way that you would do it in its entirety, including all of the things that we took, right, the sunan and the mandubat of tayammum, are the following. You would pat once, you can get rid of the excess, okay? And then do the face to the chin, like so. And then another tap, okay? And then this is what it actually looks like. You start with the right hand. You don't worry about the thumbs at this point, okay? Just leave the thumbs. Do the entirety, and then turn, doing the entirety of the arm like this, and then go over. Okay, and once you get to the hand, you move back so that the hand follows the hand again like this, all the way through. And then the left hand, the same thing. Okay, that all the way down, including the elbow. Turn, going like this, and then back again. Okay, so now you've done the entirety of the hand and the arm, except for the thumbs, and that's why you do the thumbs last, like that. Yeah, like the left, the right, and then the left. Yeah. That's one way to do it. Okay, this is the way that I was taught by a teacher who was taught by a teacher all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. So this is the way that is vetted in our tradition to do it.
Sheikh, so when you're doing the thumbs and even the top, on the thumbs, are you taking one thumb and wiping, is the goal to wipe the top of the thumb? So
Yeah.
I can see both of your thumbs, so with one you're getting the bottom, and with one you're getting I guess when you're wiping...
Well, when you're going back through, you're wiping the top here, okay? The only thing that hasn't been done at that point then is just the tops of the thumbs. So you do the right, left at the end. That's
and you
it.
don't go in between the fingers like you do in wudu.
No.
You pat
No.
fingers. Okay. Thank you, Sheikh.
Yeah. Any questions about that? Okay, so then he goes into, from there, the section on prayer. But before we do that, there's also an excerpt from Matn al-Akhdari, looking at menstruation and postpartum bleeding, which is really important to also go through. So we can sort of somewhat quickly try to go through that, inshallah, and then that'll take us into the Kitab al-Salah. So he says, فَصْلٌ فِي الْحَيْض وَالنِّسَاءُ. So he puts women basically into three categories concerning menstruation. There's al-Mubtada'a, wal-Mu'tada, wal-Hamil. So there's a woman who is on her first time. So this is, the first time that she's going through her menses. Mu'tada is a woman who's experienced, who's had this before. And then there's al-Hamil. And this is actually a rare occurrence, but the Malikis actually said that there are occurrences where someone is pregnant and can bleed. So at that point, they also put that into the categorization. And this is actually something that modern science has demonstrated to be true as well. So he says, وَأَكْثَرُ الْحَيْضِ لِلْمُبْتَدَأَ 15 يَوْمًا. The limit for a normal menstrual cycle for a woman on her first period is 15 days. So the first time that a woman is going through her menses, the max that she can go through, the max amount of time that she can be in that state would be 15 days. And any blood then that goes past 15 days would be seen as istihada. It's a sort of blood from sickness or something like that, but it's not menstrual blood. All right? وللمعتادة عادتها فإن تمادى بها الدم زادت 3 أيام ما لم تجاوز 15 يوما. As for an experienced woman, should the bleeding continue past her typical cycle, she should add 3 days to determine the limit, but not exceed 15 days. Does that make sense? So, in other words, for a woman who has already had her menstrual cycle, say for example, typically between 5 to 8 days or something like that is the average. So say, the typical menstrual cycle for her is 5 days. Then the next month she goes, and on the 6th day she's still bleeding. So what does she do? The Mālikī madhhab says she continues as if she's still on her menstrual cycle. Okay? And the second day after that would be then her 7th day. If she's still bleeding, she's still considered to be on her menstrual cycle. The 3rd day would be then the 8th day. If she's still bleeding, she's still considered to be on her menstrual cycle. On the 9th day, it would be the 4th day after her normal cycle. At that point, she no longer would be seen as being on her menstrual cycle anymore. She would be considered, that blood, if she is bleeding, is considered to be istihada. All right? From that point then, what happens is, the next month, she no longer says that her normal cycle is the 5 days. Now it's 8, based on what happened to her in the month prior. And then she would continue, okay? Say she goes past it again another 3 days, and then she goes past it another 3 days. And the most that she can ever have is 15 days. So even if this continues successively each month, it can never go past 15 days. Does that make sense? So that's how that would work out for a woman who is experienced and has gone through this before and is trying to work out what's going on. As for a pregnant woman, if bleeding occurs after 3 months, then it should not exceed 15 to 20 days. Should bleeding occur after 6 months, then it should not exceed 20 to 25 days. So for pregnant women, they would continue to assume that they have menstrual bleeding. After 3 months' time, she cannot exceed 15 days. And then after 6 months, when she's 6 months pregnant, it cannot exceed 20 days. فإن تقطع الدم لفقت أيامه حتى تكمل عادتها. If the blood flows intermittently, then she should add the total number of days in which there is flow until she completes her normal menstrual cycle. So if a woman has blood that cuts in and out, typically they would call that individual al-Mulaffiqa. It's basically the one who is combining days, or al-Muhayyara. She perplexed basically the jurists on this issue because it's a difficult issue. So he says this type of person should take a ritual bath on the day that she stops bleeding, and then she should resume praying, etc. And when it comes back, she counts that as a day until she completes her normal amount of days. There was also a difference on this, but this is the mashhur from Ibn Rushd.
So, Sheikh, are you saying if it's on for one day, you count that day, the next day it's off, you don't count that day?
Correct.
So essentially, if it was on-off for 15, you'd have about 30 days. Then meaning it was on one day, off, on, it would be 30 days total. 15 of those you prayed in, 15 you essentially didn't.
Correct. And that's why the max is 15. But that would be on the basis that her normal monthly cycle is 15 days. Right? So
How about the plus 3?
yeah, so it would be plus 3 to whatever her norm. So if her normal was 5, and so it's cutting in and out, then she would simply go to those 5, and if there's an additional 3, then she would add those 3, but not anymore. So it would be 8. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I heard someone speak up.
So for example, if she's cutting on and off, and she cut off for like 4 hours, and the hood is still in, after the 4 hours, like she could have, her period might have ended after 4 hours. Like what is the time frame that she has to do, like to make wudu? Yeah, she knows herself to cut on and off at the end. Like she goes, oh, it's been 5 days. I know I might get it in like 7 more hours. Like it might come spotting. Like the spotting is her usual. Does she still have to pray if it hasn't shown for a certain amount of hours?
So yeah, if it cuts and it's intermittent even in the same day, it would be considered for that day that it cut, right? And then if it comes back again, once it comes back again, it would then be considered that she's back on. So even if it's happening in the exact same day, she would, she would take a ritual bath and then, do what she can. And if it came back again, then it comes back again. Now, if she's aware,
she knows it's her habit.
Yeah, if she's aware that it's her habit, then she should just wait.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So then he says, وَلَا يَحِلُّ لِلْحَائِضِ صَلَاةٌ وَلَا صَوْمٌ وَلَا طَوَافٌ وَلَا مَسُّ مُصْحَفٍ وَلَا دُخُولُ مَسْجِدٍ وَعَلَيْهَا قَضَاءُ الصَّوْمِ دُونَ الصَّلَاةِ وقراءتها جائزة ولا يحل لزوجها فرجها ولا ما بين سرتها وركبتيها حتى تغتسل. A menstruating woman may not pray. She can't fast. She can't make tawaf around the Kaaba. She can't touch a copy of the Quran or enter a masjid. And she's only required to make up fasts and any prayer as well that may have come in before her period came in, but then she didn't pray because at a certain point she got her period. And so at that point, that prayer would still be something that she would have to make up. And according to the Malikis, she can recite the Quran. So this is different than the other madhhab, right, who don't allow for women to recite the Quran on their menstrual cycles. And intercourse is unlawful during this time period as well, as he says. And the Malikis were extra cautious and said that any act of intimacy that would be done between her navel and knees is also unlawful during that time, because they saw this as something that could potentially easily lead to intercourse. And intercourse remains unlawful until she takes a ritual bath. And the only exception then that they make about her touching the Quran would be if she is a teacher or she's a student trying to maintain her hifz or something like that. After she's finished her cycle. Yeah. So she would just make up. Like, Dhuhr came in and, she just kind of waited. And then, before Asr came in, she realized, oh, I got my period and now I didn't pray Dhuhr. But it did come in before I actually got it. Therefore, she would still have to make up that prayer.
One question.
Yeah.
What, when it comes to considered to be a student, could that be your personal health, or that you do regularly, or are we talking about being a student under a teacher?
No, it's just your hifz. If you are a person who is memorizing the Quran in whatever way, that's your thing. But it also, you know if you're actually doing it or if you're not doing it, or so.
Sheikh, in terms of the mushaf, in terms of just the letters of the Quran being on the phone, if someone's looking at it on the phone and using that, I assume the mushaf being the actual bound book that we know of, but I don't want to make it without asking. Yeah, so
the phone was not included in that understanding, so you're fine. So a mushaf is simply just it would be the mushaf is literally just the Arabic text of the Quran itself without any tafsir added or anything else additionally added. So a phone, this is actually a fatwa that was given by Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, for example, on this question of the phone. And others have followed suit as well. So they said that is not included in the definition, obviously, of a mushaf.
And in that case, I assume like what you said now, if there's some English in there, like a translation side by side, that would also be fine for a woman to read the Arabic.
Yeah.
Because it's in there as well. Or you said, what if tafsir what if you have the tafsir in Arabic and you have the mushaf in Arabic? With that tafsir, you're now able to hold it and not have to be concerned even when you're height.
Yeah. So it's just the mushaf. We're just talking about that very distinct book that only carries within it the surah or the chapters of the Quran from Fatiha to Nas without any additional writing in it.
And it's okay to use that almost like as a workaround. Like if I know if
absolutely.
For that purpose, like I have a Quran in my home with tafsir in it specifically, so when I'm on Haid, I don't have to worry about being a student or a teacher.
Yes.
I'm going to read the Quran, I'm able to.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Should this is like a little bit off topic. When you're reading tafsir, like, should you have a teacher? Because some things, like, it might be written in English and it's not like that accurate when it comes to like tafsir and the terms and the meaning in Arabic.
Well, yeah.
Should it be mostly taught?
Absolutely, I think it should be taught. There are certain types of tafsir though that are just so vetted and are quite easy for people to go through on their own that you don't necessarily need to have a teacher for that. Although again, having a teacher is going to be extremely beneficial. But like going through the Jalalatain, for example, which is a very primer or basic type of tafsir, that can be done on, anyone can really do that and benefit from it. And, there may be certain types of issues that need, to be further explained by someone who's learned. But for the most part, someone can go through the tafsir on their own. Now, there are other tafsir, al-Razi's tafsir or something like that undoubtedly you're going to need a teacher to understand what is being discussed here. So, let me just finish really quickly this section and then I'll open it up for questions. So this is now the very quick section on nifas, which is postpartum blood. And he says, وَالنِّفَاسُ كَالْحَيْدِ فِي مَنْعِهِ وَأَكْثَرُهُ 60 يَوْمًا. Postpartum blood is the same as menstrual blood concerning what it prevents a woman from. And the limit for postpartum bleeding in the Mālikī madhhab is 60 days, unlike the Hanafis, for example, who said it was 40 days. فإذا انقطع الدم قبلها ولو في يوم الولادة اغتسلت وصلت. Should the blood cease to flow during that time, even if on the same day as the birth, then she should perform ghusl and begin to pray. So if it stops at any point in time, she should take a ritual bath and resume praying. فإذا عاودها الدم فإن كان بينهما 15 يوما فأكثر كان الثاني حيضا وإلا ضم إلى الأول وكان من تمام النفاس. If the flow of blood were to resume in the interval between the two longer than 15 days, it's considered menstrual blood. But if less than that, its duration should be added to the previous days and considered a continuation of the postpartum bleeding. So the last issue is if she stops bleeding during postpartum and the duration that it has stopped is longer than 15 days, then she treats that as a menstrual cycle, because she went beyond the minimum time period of purity. So what happens after that point then, after she stops for 15 days, whatever happens at that point, that blood would be seen as menstrual blood, no longer postpartum blood. But if the blood stops for less than 15 days before it comes back again, then she is to treat it as a continuation of the postpartum bleeding. And then she would keep adding those days until either she stops again for 15 days or more, at which point then she would be, at that point, considered to be on her menstrual cycle, or she reaches the maximum amount of days, which is 60 days for postpartum bleeding. Any questions about that? Okay, so we'll end here. And then next week, inshallah, we'll go straight into the book of prayer, Kitab al-Salah. I went through that last section, though, quite quickly, so if anybody has any follow-up questions to that, we can talk about. Yeah, Nuruddin.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah.
Just to kind of touch back on what the sister was saying, should as far as reading tafsir of Quran, should a teacher, one do that with a teacher, so that they don't confuse muhkam and mutashabihat verses of Quran, because I've known people in the past, for example, they'll they say they read Quran, they're reading these translations, these English translations, and some of them, they have some things in there that they translate into English that could really confuse a person. For example, if it mentions the yad of Allah, the literal meaning is hand, right? So a person could read something and think they'll take it literal. So wouldn't it be necessary for someone to take the tafsir with teacher?
Well, so the tafsir, if it's a good tafsir, would properly explicate on that issue in a way that's simple enough for people to understand, and you would hope that they would just give the proper treatment of that. This isn't a physical hand.
Yes.
We affirm the notion of yad. We deny any physical attribution to it, and then from there they can just say, and bila kayf, and we don't really go into the explanation of what it is exactly. Or
do you know which tafsir writer you suggest that actually explains it that way? I would like to purchase a book like that.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Yeah. Maybe I haven't seen the things that are out there in English, but yeah, if you know of problematic English translations where people are saying no, this is a physical yed, as they say, كَمَا يَلِيقُ بِجَلَالِهِ or something along those lines, which is a very confusing statement that's oftentimes being used to deceive people, then you should stay away from it and advise people to stay away from it. But I'm just speaking about the general tafasir, which don't really go into that much depth on these questions, and they more or less remain quite neutral. I can look and see which ones would be good for something like that. You know, there's, in the English language, it's going to be quite limited. In the Arabic, there's a plethora of things, and there's also things that are not all that great as well. So, but let me think about it, and I can get back to you, inshallah.
Also, inshallah, could you, I mean, is there any, like any book references, like as far as like purification and prayer for Mālikī?
Book references for purification of prayer?
Yeah, for Mālikī.
Well, so the one that we're doing right now, al-Murshid al-Muʿīn of Ibn Ashir is good. There's an English translation of that.
How can I access that book?
So we had, I think Majid was able to find it. Majid, maybe you can link a link that, you know, gives people...
Yes, please. Inshallah. Barakallahu feek.
Where you found it. Allah barak feek. Yeah. I think Zaytuna had it, and there may have been other copies somewhere else as well.
Zaytuna, I think, next by Abdullah Yates. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's on Amazon. I'm sure one of us can put it up really.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great if you guys can link that for Sidi Nuruddin.
Barakallahu feekum.
Allah barak feekum.
We're from Tennessee.
Oh, really? Nuruddin, you're from Tennessee?
Yes, mashallah.
MashaAllah. Do you know Sheikh Hamza Abdul Malik?
You know, I know of him, and he's in Memphis, right?
Yeah, he's in Memphis, yeah.
Yes, I've been intending to go and meet with him. He's doing some really good things in Memphis, mashallah.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a very dear friend. And
Midtown Mosque, I believe.
Midtown Mosque, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we'll end here, inshallah. We'll see you all next week. Sorry about the beginning portion of the class. It's just that there was, new people here. It seemed like, for me going into all of these topics without giving some kind of preface as to what was going on, it would have made things a little bit more difficult. So, jazakumullah kullu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.